The call came in at 5:40 in the morning. A man on the other end of the line, voice ragged, barely coherent, told the mayor of Bay Village, Ohio, that his wife had been murdered. The mayor was Spencer Houck, a close friend and neighbor. And the woman beaten to death in her own bedroom was Marilyn Reese Shepard. She was 4 months pregnant. Her 7-year-old son slept entirely undisturbed just down the hall. Her husband, Dr. Sam Shepard, was the one making that call. Bay Village in 1954 was the kind of suburb that didn't expect things like this. Small, affluent, quietly proud of itself. A lakeside community west of Cleveland where prominent families built large homes on Lake Erie and lived the kind of lives that looked, from the outside, like the reward for doing everything right. The Shepards were exactly that kind of family. Sam was a staff osteopath at Bayview Hospital, co-founded by his own father. His brothers were physicians too. Medicine wasn't just a career for the Shepards, it was a bloodline. And Marilyn fit into that world with a warmth that had nothing to do with status. People who knew her described someone grounded, genuinely kind. The sort of person who remembered your birthday and actually meant the question when she asked how you were doing. On the evening of July 3rd, they had friends over, Don and Nancy Ahern, and the four of them watched a movie on television while their son Chip slept upstairs. By midnight, Marilyn had fallen asleep on the couch. Sam dozed off beside her. The Aherns let themselves out quietly. What happened in the hours between midnight and that 5:40 a.m. phone call is where everything in this case begins and ends. The house on Lake Road sat close to the water, a large, comfortable home with a steep embankment dropping down to Lake Erie at the back. The night of the 3rd into the 4th of July was warm. The kind of summer night where windows stay open and the sound of the lake carries up the bank. The Aherns had gone. Chip was asleep in his room upstairs, undisturbed through all of it. Maybe the boy was just a remarkably deep sleeper. Or perhaps what happened was faster and more contained than the scene suggested. It's also possible that something else entirely shaped that night. Something the investigation never uncovered, never even looked for seriously enough to find out. What Sam told police, and what he would repeat, in varying forms, for the rest of his life, went like this. He woke on the couch to the sound of Marilyn screaming from upstairs. Not calling out, screaming. He ran up the stairs in the dark, and in the dim light of the bedroom he saw a figure near the bed, white or light-colored. He said, large, with bushy hair. He moved toward it. There was a struggle, and then nothing. The lights went out inside his own head, and he went down hard. When he came to, he was on the floor of the bedroom. The room was still. Marilyn was beside him on the bed. He said later he checked for a pulse anyway. The physician's instinct, the refusal to accept what his eyes were already telling him. He went to Chip's room. The boy was untouched, still asleep. Sam came back downstairs, moving through his own house in a daze. And then he heard something, or felt something, a presence, near the back of the house, near the lake. He went outside. He went down the embankment in the dark, the ground uneven under his feet, the lake black below him. There was a figure on the beach. He fought with it again, and again the lights went out. He woke up face down at the water's edge, waves moving across his legs, the July sky beginning to lighten above him. He pulled himself up. He went back into the house. He picked up the phone and called Spencer Houck. When Spencer Houck arrived, and then the police shortly after, here is what they found. Sam was sitting in the kitchen, wet from the waist down, shirtless. His t-shirt was gone, and it was never found. His neck was visibly wrong, held stiffly, the movement guarded in the way of someone whose body is protecting an injury it already knows about. His face carried that flat, disconnected expression that multiple witnesses noted. Not the performed shock of someone composing a story, but the look of a person whose nervous system hasn't caught up to what his eyes have seen. Upstairs, the bedroom told a story that nobody who entered it that morning forgot. The scene wasn't just disturbed, it was consumed. Whatever had taken place in that room had been total. The bed, the floor, the walls nearby, all of it bore witness to something that had not stopped quickly or easily. A lamp was overturned. Items from the nightstand were scattered. The physical evidence of violent movement was everywhere, and yet the original investigators never rigorously established whose movement, in which direction, toward what end. Sam's medical bag had been pulled from wherever it was kept and left open on the floor, items scattered around it. Nothing appeared to be missing. The ransacked bag with nothing removed left investigators with a puzzle. Was the killer searching for something specific they couldn't find? Was the whole thing staged to look like a burglary? Or was an intruder simply interrupted before they could finish? And then there was the blood trail. Away from the bed, toward the door, down toward the stairs. A series of drops that moved in a direction, which meant whoever left them was upright, was moving, was leaving. The trail was documented by the first officers on scene and then, in the chaos of the proceedings that followed, was never subjected to the rigorous forensic analysis that might have produced a definitive answer. It was noted. It was not pursued. Sam's neck injury was real. Multiple physicians examined him and confirmed genuine cervical trauma, a severe strain at minimum, possibly a fracture. The kind of injury that comes from a hard, direct impact. His watch was missing from his wrist and turned up later in the green bag among the scattered items from his medical bag. How it got there, when it was removed, by whom, was never established. The crime scene should have been a locked vault of evidence. By the time any serious forensic attention was paid to the house on Lake Road, it had been walked through by police officers, neighbors, the coroner, journalists, and various officials who treated the space as a viewing rather than a source of answers. The photographer for the Cleveland Press was inside the house before the coroner had finished his examination. Bay Village had almost no experience with homicide investigation, and the conclusion the investigators had already reached, in the hours before Sam was ever formally questioned, before any evidence had been processed, shaped everything that followed. Which evidence to follow and which to leave alone. Which questions to ask and which answers to accept. When Sam described a figure on the beach, they heard a man making things up. When the blood trail toward the door was noted, no one demanded to know why it hadn't been followed to an answer. On the afternoon of July 4th, Sam was taken to Bayview Hospital for his neck injury. There, while heavily sedated for the pain, he was questioned at his bedside for hours. No attorney was present. Louis Seltzer was the editor of the Cleveland Press, and from the moment the story broke, he decided what it was. Not as a journalist weighing evidence, as a man who had made up his mind and intended to use his newspaper to act on that conclusion. His front pages demanded action. His editorials asked, openly, why Sam Shepard hadn't been arrested yet. One headline read simply, "Why isn't Sam Shepard in jail?" The inquest into Marilyn's death was held in a high school gymnasium, open to the public, broadcast live. The press sat alongside the attorneys. Sam's lawyer was physically prevented from approaching his own client during questioning. Sam was arrested on July 30th, 1954. His trial began in October and lasted 9 weeks. The jury was not sequestered for most of it, meaning they went home each night to a city drowning in coverage that assumed his guilt. The prosecution built its case on 3 pillars: motive, opportunity, and inconsistency. Motive came in the form of Susan Hayes, a medical technician at the hospital with whom Sam had been having an affair. Opportunity was straightforward. He was the only adult in the house. And the inconsistency they hammered hardest was this. Sam had told investigators he barely knew Hayes. When she took the stand and confirmed the affair in full detail, that lie collapsed in front of the jury in real time. It was a small lie. Understandable, even, a man trying to protect himself from the obvious implication. But once a jury catches someone in one lie, they find it easier to believe all the others. On December 21st, 1954, Sam Shepard was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. What does a man hold on to when the system that was supposed to protect him has buried him instead? Sam Shepard spent 10 years in an Ohio penitentiary insisting he was innocent. Not loudly, not to the press, but consistently, to anyone who would listen. Most people didn't. Most people had already moved on. Lee Bailey was 28 years old when he picked up Sam's file. Brash, sharp, and hungry, the kind of lawyer who saw a rigged fight and wanted in. But what drove Bailey wasn't pure ambition. What he saw in that file genuinely outraged him. A man had been convicted not by evidence, but by headline. The trial had been conducted inside a media storm that no jury could have survived with its impartiality intact. Louis Seltzer had essentially prosecuted Sam Shepard from his editor's desk, and the courtroom had simply ratified the verdict Seltzer had already declared. Bailey went to war on Sam's behalf, not to win an argument about press freedom, but to get an innocent man out of a cell before what remained of his life was completely consumed. Every filing, Every appeal, every constitutional argument was in service of that single urgent fact. Sam Shepard was sitting in prison while whoever killed Marilyn was not. Federal courts agreed. In 1964, Sam was ordered released pending appeal. Ohio fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. And in 1966, in Shepard v. Maxwell, the court ruled 8-1 in Sam's favor, condemning the pre-trial publicity that had made the original trial a constitutional violation from the start. The retrial was almost anticlimactic. Bailey dismantled the prosecution's case in weeks. The jury acquitted Sam after less than 12 hours. He walked out of that courthouse at 42 years old, a free man. 10 years gone. Marilyn still dead. Her killer still unidentified. Sam's life after the verdict did not resemble rescue. He married a German woman who had been writing to him in prison. He tried to return to medicine. His license was challenged repeatedly. He became, for a period, a professional wrestler billed as the killer, which tells you something about where a decade of wrongful imprisonment had deposited him. He drank. He married again, briefly. He died in April 1970 at 46, of liver failure. His son Chip, 7 years old the night his mother was murdered, grew up to spend much of his adult life inside this case. Not just carrying it, but actively pursuing it. He filed a wrongful imprisonment lawsuit in the 1990s that went to full trial in 2000, arguing not merely that Sam had been acquitted, but that he had been genuinely innocent. The jury did not agree. The lawsuit failed. But the investigation Chip's legal team assembled produced something significant, a sustained look at a man named Richard Eberling, and what he might have done on the night of July 3, 1954. Eberling was a window washer who had worked for several Bay Village families during the 1950s, including the Shepards. He had been inside their home. He admitted, decades later when arrested for an entirely separate crime, that he had stolen a ring from the Shepard house during one of his visits. He also claimed he had cut his hand there, offering this as an innocent explanation for why, according to the defense team's later investigation, a blood sample at the scene didn't match any Shepard family member. Here it's important to be precise about what is actually established and what isn't. The claim that Eberling's blood was present at the crime scene was a retroactive theory developed by Sam's defense team in the 1990s, not an unresolved mystery left behind by the original detectives. The state's forensic experts fiercely contested the methodology and conclusions, noting the samples were decades old, heavily degraded, and contaminated. Modern forensic consensus treats the 1990s DNA work on this case as inconclusive at best. What is established? In 1984, Eberling was convicted of murdering Ethel Durkin, an elderly woman whose household he had worked in and whose estate he had maneuvered himself into inheriting. He was sentenced to life. 3 other women in whose homes he had worked also died under circumstances never satisfactorily explained. From prison in the 1990s, Eberling began giving interviews in which he made suggestive, circling statements about the Shepard case, never confessing directly, always implying. He said he knew what happened that night. He mentioned a bushy-haired man. He hinted without ever landing. Whether this was genuine guilt bleeding through, deliberate manipulation, or the performance of a man who had learned that ambiguity attracted attention, that question died with him in 1998. During the 2000 civil trial, Chip's legal team floated another theory, one circling back to the Houck family. The defense suggested Marilyn had been involved with Spencer Houck, and that Esther Houck, aware of it, had entered the house that night in a jealous rage. There is no contemporaneous law enforcement record, no verified account from the 1954 investigation, indicating any confirmed relationship between Marilyn and Spencer Houck. The theory emerged primarily from sensationalist true crime books and assertions made by defense lawyers decades after the fact. Esther Houck died in 1982. Spencer died in 1998. Neither was ever charged with anything. There is a question that gets lost in the argument over competing suspects, and it's the one the evidence raises most insistently. What does the nature of this attack tell us about who carried it out? The sheer rage driving the assault is unmistakable. An opportunistic intruder looking for valuables doesn't unleash that kind of targeted fury against a sleeping witness. This is not the signature of someone who wanted to get in and get out. It's the signature of someone who had something consuming and personal to express. But the counterargument is equally uncomfortable. Would a physician, A man who understood biology and had dozens of quiet options really choose to commit a crime this chaotic in the room right next to his sleeping child? Neither explanation sits cleanly. Both leave something that doesn't fit. And in all of it, the legal arguments, the forensic disputes, the Supreme Court precedent, what risks getting lost is Marilyn herself. She was 31 years old. She was 4 months pregnant. She had a son who adored her. On the afternoon of July 3rd, she was making plans for the following day. Family was coming over for the holiday. She fell asleep on her couch watching television. Her killer was never punished. The tool used to beat her was never found. The full truth of what happened in that bedroom has never been established to anyone's legal satisfaction. Chip Shepard has noted in interviews that what he wants, more than a legal declaration, is simply the truth. To know. He has lived his entire adult life inside a case without an ending. The house on Lake Road is still standing. Lake Erie still runs behind it at the bottom of that steep embankment. The lake doesn't change. Marilyn Reese Shepard was murdered on the 4th of July, 1954. Her son is in his late 70s. The file is still, officially, open, and the silence where a verdict should have been has lasted 70 years.